What the hell are they doing? Is this really what the entertainment industry has become? Non-stop sequels, prequels, reboots, and reimaginings, with nearly all of them aimed at some mystical modern audience and its more coveted progressive worldview, despite there being no evidence this demographic even exists. Major studio projects are written by what seem like fan fiction writers with a grudge against the IP, rather than with an eye to make fans happy. Most come off as angry, bitter, snarky swipes at once beloved characters and franchises as if this is what audiences are asking for. But other than purple-haired, septum-pierced crazies on Twitter, who the hell is asking for any of this? Look, I get at least part of the why. I'm going to mostly leave the social and political stuff out of this video, so today we'll just stick to because studios are lazy as shit and think it's easy money. This makes some sense. It's easier to get someone to consume something they've already told you they like than it is to get them to try something new. It's familiar and safe. It's comforting. Like eating your favorite meal instead of trying some wildly different ethnic food you've never seen before. I think we all understand from a risk management position why this keeps happening. Hollywood, aside from just being craven, is risk averse. And it's even easier if the customer already loves the thing. It takes very little talent to dig into the studio's back catalog and find an old title that people remember from the 70s and 80s and dust it off and give it to them again. Why risk investing all that money in a new property no one's ever heard of in the hopes that it becomes the next big thing, when you can dig up the corpse of the old big thing and walk it around like Weekend at Bernie's? And no, you assholes, that's not a request to remake that movie. As with most things, South Park nailed this move with their member berries bit about the newest Star Wars trilogy. At its heart, that's all any of this is. It's pure nostalgia bait. Taking something a ton of people once loved and giving it to them again. Creating something new is hard, so why go through all that? Just look back at what your studio already owns that made money in the past and polish that off. Or hell, just buy a property you like from another studio and make it your own and reboot it. Or be Disney and do both. Now, I think there are two issues with this. The first, whether accidental or on purpose, is that it tends to destroy the old franchises for older fans. And it turns out we resent the fuck out of that and tend to be vocal about it. Why wouldn't we? You have people like me who grew up with these stories and characters who are pissed they're being dug up and used this way. Most of these franchises were made for our generation. We loved them and supported them, not just financially, but with our time and energy. We've been rightfully protective of them, since our fandom and love for them had been what made them profitable in the first damn place, and the only reason they retained any value into the future. And hell yeah, we attempted to gatekeep them, and if we dared say anything, we were branded man-babies, or haters, or toxic fans, as if we were wrong to get angry when some studio dug them up in an effort to resell it to us, only to then subvert our expectations, rather than try and, how about meet and surpass them? Even the idea of fan service has become a dirty word in Hollywood, as if giving fans what they actually want is something you try and avoid. Imagine going to a restaurant and ordering a steak, only to be presented with a pile of cat shit on rice. When you question the waiter, he sneers at you and says, "Why, sir, aren't your expectations subverted?" We were told by these new creators that these things were not being made for us, and that if we didn't like it, we shouldn't watch. So lots of times we didn't. And then they complained that us not watching was also a problem. So we got these reimaginings and reboots anyway. But honestly, when this first started, I was kind of into it. Again, member berries. It was cool to see some love shown to some things I liked when I was a kid. And I went into them naively thinking they'd be respected. And by association, I'd be respected as a fan for having loved these things. And at first they sort of did. It kind of started slowly. You'd have these old IPs brought back to life, and instead of taking them seriously, they were sort of lampooned tongue-in-cheek. These were pretty successful. I think you can point to the Beverly Hillbillies and the Brady Bunch as your ground zero for these. Take the Brady Bunch. Yeah, it was corny even back in the 70s. But even so, it was obvious the studio and the creatives involved really did have a respect for the show and fans. So instead of making the Bradys the butt of every joke, they were blissfully unaware of how out of step they were, and never knocked down a peg by the writers or the characters in the movie. In most cases, it was the exact opposite. Eventually, the wholesomeness of the Bradys and their quirkiness wins the day, and rather than being forced to adapt to the present found what was lovable about them. Same goes for the Beverly Hillbillies. The point wasn't to make fun of these characters, but to bring them forward and still make them likable. Neither of these franchises and their characters were brought back to life to be made fun of for our modern entertainment. There was a realization that these were beloved characters, and even though they were just TV characters, they needed to be treated right. By the 2000s, things started to get a little dicey. You had Charlie's Angels and Scooby-Doo both released within a few years of each other. Both made attempts at staying true to the source material, but you were starting to see a change in tone. Maybe it was just societal, but there was this feeling that the filmmakers were giggling at even making these movies. Sort of a, how could anyone have liked these things? You know what, let's make them better. Like the Brady Bunch, yeah, these titles were dated. They were from decades earlier, after all. I mean, I'd like to think there's a reason no studio has dredged up Three's Company. As hard as it is to imagine now, that plot actually made sense back then, but would completely be out of sync today. So no, there's no reason to remake Three's Company, except for the nostalgia of it, since the entire plot revolved around a guy who needed a place to live and found an apartment with 2 single women, and in order to move in, he needed to pretend to be gay. In California, of all places. And if a studio did decide to try, it would need to be altered so drastically that it would be Three's Company in name only, which is its own issue at this point and one we'll address in a future video, I'm sure. So these remakes were starting to take liberties with these titles in order to make them feel relevant today, instead of, just not remaking them in the first place if they felt so out of place. That was an option after all. But that money was just out there waiting to be spent on things people remembered fondly. And that's hard to pass up. And in a little more than 20 years, we went from that to this. With the newest reboot of Charlie's Angels, you had an entire production which seemed hell-bent on alienating half the population of Earth. Let's be real here, the Charlie's Angels TV show existed for 2 reasons: tits and ass. It's just true. You had 3 beautiful women running around solving crimes, but this wasn't Sherlock Holmes, for goodness sakes. No one was watching for the spectacular acting or world-renowned writing. We were watching for this. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. And the 2000 reboot understood this. Sure, they poked a bit of fun at it, but they remembered the roots of the show. Elizabeth Banks' version in 2019 was far angrier at this trope even existing. And to make sure none of that was the focus in the wrong way, nearly all men in the movie were constantly being portrayed as evil or weak or stupid, or more likely all of the above. The women were sexy, but only insofar as it was used to show how pathetic male characters were. Can't be allowing that male gaze to dictate anything, can we? Not to be outdone, Mindy Kaling has just given us Velma. Like I said, I'll leave politics mostly out of this video this time, so tearing into this show without doing that may leave you a bit wanting. But like 2019's Charlie's Angels before it, Velma has lost all of the charm that made the original likable and one of the most beloved cartoons of all time. In an effort to bring in that modern audience they seem so desperate to cater to, the show devolves into every shallow cliche of the progressive left. From race and sex-swapped characters, to non-stop talk about toxic masculinity and gender issues, to the blatant sexualization of kids, it's all in there. It's so bad, even critics on the left have started to bash it because they seem to think Kaling is some sort of plant from the right and did it to make them look bad. And try and keep in mind, we're talking about Scooby-Doo here. A cartoon from the late 60s and 70s about a group of teens and a talking dog running around solving mysteries. Why in the holy hell would anyone feel the need to bring back Scooby-Doo only to shit all over the characters and the memories of those of us who grew up enjoying this simple, innocent show? Who was asking to bring back to life the Scooby Gang only to do what Kaling and the rest of the creatives have done to them? The show is so awful, it's as if it was made precisely to tear down the old one. It's bitter and mean and nasty and nothing like the original. But why? Keep in mind, so this video doesn't run forever, I'm only mentioning these blatant reboots of old TV shows for now, but the same things have been done with movies as well. For what seems like the past decade or more, there have been an all-out assault on our pasts. Guys like myself and others here have become rightfully angry about the way our stories and characters have been treated. This was earned. Most of us were open to seeing these things brought back until we saw what the end goal was. Now, there is absolutely a knee-jerk reaction to each and every time an old franchise gets dusted off, and each and every time we're proven right, as they seem to get worse and worse. Creatives no longer get the benefit of the doubt because they sure as hell haven't earned one. But you know what? For argument's sake, let's say all of these have been done as fantastic as the shill media sites have told you they were. Not only did they bring the old titles back, but they actually did them justice. Hell, they improved on them. Wouldn't that be great? No, actually it wouldn't. Let me explain it this way. I was born in 1970 and feel grateful I grew up in a time with such fantastic new franchises around every corner. In 1976, my older sister brought me to see Rocky when it was first released. I was 6. I was 7 when Star Wars hit theaters in 77 and saw that with her too. I was 9 when Alien debuted in 79. 11 for Raiders in 81. 12 for E.T. in 82. I was 14 for Terminator and Ghostbusters in 1984. I was a teenager for all those great John Hughes teen movies that now define the 80s for most people. 16 for Top Gun, 17 for Predator, and 18 for Die Hard. Everything felt new. Nothing was a retread from my dad's era. These were tremendous stories with fantastic villains and charismatic heroes. They were so groundbreaking that most of these characters remain iconic to this day. It felt like I was the perfect age and the bullseye of the target demographic at that point, and as if everything was being made just for me. Looking back now, I feel even luckier. My childhood was dominated by entertainment that was new. Very few franchises were rehashes of things from the past. And yeah, with Star Wars we eventually got the idea of trilogies, but at least it generally kept sequels to a bare minimum. Except for the Bond films, there was pretty much no thought of milking a franchise forever. And even then, there were giant blockbuster movies that were one and done. Can you imagine E.T. being released today and being a standalone movie? Second issue is that it made Hollywood lazier, and now has shortchanged an entire generation of getting their own new stories and heroes. Zoomers should have had their own versions of these icons they could grow up with, but instead they got mostly Gen X's sloppy seconds. Hollywood decided to take our old stories and barely rewarm them and feed them to audiences. In most of these cases, that just meant directly resurrecting old characters with aging actors long too old to play their former roles and knocking them down to size, so newer, better characters could take their place. For some reason, this is mistakenly seen as a good thing by modern creators, but I have no idea why. Again, this pisses off older fans who don't want to remember their heroes that way, and gives nothing new to younger ones. Audiences don't win at all. In other cases, the franchises themselves were revived only to be changed to almost non-recognition. So instead of getting a cool space saga in the vein of Star Trek and a hero like Captain Kirk for your generation, you get a retrofitted canon-breaking Star Trek and a guy they're calling Kirk. Maybe you'd like a horror comedy movie like Ghostbusters. Well, how about exactly Ghostbusters? But instead of it being 4 guys, it's 4 women. Bam! How's that for creativity? You see, it's completely different because of the vaginas. And because it's not funny. At all. Is there any real reason to go through the list of franchises that have had this treatment? The list would be shorter if I listed those that haven't at this point. And that's just sad for everyone involved. However you slice it, and for whatever reason you'd like to pin it to, Gen Z has been robbed of their own heroes and stories. The strangest part is that most of you guys don't seem to notice or even care, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just that tendency many of you have towards following orders at this point. So if the big media companies tell you this is made for you, you'll dutifully consume next product. Maybe you haven't had anyone a bit older in your life pointing out that they had it better than you in terms of the entertainment made for them when they were younger. But we just did. That's not old guy thinks his childhood was better stuff. Most of the franchises around today were born when I was a kid. I was part of that first generation to love them and make them valuable. I honestly wish you guys would have had that for yourselves. And the MCU, even when it was actually good and rocking, isn't the same thing. It was one hell of an achievement. But that one overarching story doesn't make up for dozens of unique ones from the 70s and 80s. As far as where we go from here, I wish I had an answer. Truth is, I'm pretty black-pilled about the whole thing. Mostly, that's just because I think the people in charge of studios right now are more interested in
the message,
as the drinker puts it, than in turning a profit. There's just no way you get a show like She-Hulk or Velma or the abomination that was Rings of Power if the goal is appealing to the widest audience to get them to pay you to watch your show. You just don't. In the meantime, you'll continue to get entertainment churned out like we've gotten the last few years that seems tailor-made to piss off longtime fans and not give younger fans anything new to call their own. Best suggestion, just walk away from this stuff. I'll take one for the team here to keep reviewing these things, I guess. You're welcome, world. The rest of you, stop hate-watching things. Until they get the message that no one wants what they're selling, Hollywood's waiters will just keep serving you cat shit on rice and daring you to complain. You have to walk away. Or, you know what? Don't. I'm not the boss of you.